looking forward to hosting Rebekka today to give us information how she did it, what made you start, and what are the joys of homeschooling, so that other parents can also look at it and see it's either they go homeschooling or they also see a business opportunity in with homeschooling. But before we start our meeting, I want to welcome everybody that has just joined us from Facebook, and welcome. And before we start, I like our chairman to also lead the way and tell us who Saljak is, and then from there we're going to introduce our speaker, Rebekka Lienberg. Over to you, Mr. Botabakwe.
Thank you, leadership. Thank you, Mr. Majokana. Welcome everybody who's in here at home via Zoom. Let me also welcome everybody who's streaming live on other platforms. And welcome Rebekka, Mrs Lienberg, and thank you very much for coming to the South African Leadership Gentlemen's Club to come and talk to the SALGC nation and the South African nation with regard to the main issue of home education. We truly have been very concerned with the COVID issues and the possible vaccine mandates that will be given to our children in schools. So a lot of questions starting to arise for many quarters as to, is there any alternative? Because half the time my children are at home during lockdowns, they're not even attending classes. And people are running out of options, and some have information that you obviously have, but not everybody has this information. So it is the responsibility of this club to try and find information and share it with the nation of people who are concerned. Let me just quickly tell you who SALGC is. We are the South African Leadership Gentlemen's Club, which is a national NPO for all men in this country and boy child in leadership development. The purpose of this is to develop men from just being ordinary men walking the street to finding what God has ordained them to be, the strength that man is supposed to have, not a physical strength, but a mental strength of being able to provide for their families and lead the direction through which life has to go. So we, as I said, we are a national NPO, we are a non-racial, and we are a club of no class. Every man who lives in our country is welcome to the club. We are a membership-based club having over 3,000 members right now. More information on the club is also accessible on our various platforms, which is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our website. I think we also have a LinkedIn a platform where our information is also shared. So the club has looked at, before its foundation, the leadership of this club tried to look at what could be the solutions for the challenges that our country is facing. A lot of solutions or proposals came into the picture, and we thought, because we're not a political party, we cannot be playing in a political space. But these hypotheses that came into the picture, finally, we ended up with the 5 founding pillars, which can be found on our website. These pillars explains exactly what we stand for, because they address the psychosocial and economic challenges of our country. And all the other programs that we derive, they come from all these 5 pillars. So this program that we are on today is one of the many programs that the club is running. This program arises from the first pillar of mental liberation of a boy and a man in this country, so that we can be able to provide the antithesis to the crimes and that are meted to our women, children, and even ourselves. As you know, that bullying is also there for boy child against each other. Even us as men and friends, we also go around bullying each other. So like I say, it became the antithesis of that, because this is where we're talking mental liberation of the mind. So these programs are changed. This program, particularly the one we are at, is meant to change the mind from how we generally think to see things outside the box, and not always believe mainstream is the only solution to the challenges that we face. Like for instance, now we're going to talk education which is outside mainstream. So people should not look at mainstream and say it's everything that everyone needs. So there's more information that you can get from mainstream education, even outside mainstream education, even outside mainstream media. So there's just so much people can learn from. So hence we requested you, we humbly so, that you should be our presenter today to talk about this highly important topic of homeschooling. So the other programs that we have, they are also deriving from these 5 pillars. But today we are particularly on this pillar of mental liberation. And our club also, as I've mentioned, that is membership base of men and boy child of all races and social class. It is also would not be a success in what it does if it doesn't accommodate the voice of the women, because women are the core and of our homes and our families. These are partners that God gave to us for us to drive life going forward with. And without a voice of a woman, we understand as SALGC that in a home where there's no woman and the voice is not there, chances of that home being a success are very limited. You have to work double to double the effort that we have in order to achieve that. But with a woman by your side, we believe that a success is imminent, one way or the other, if you keep pushing. Therefore, women are allowed in SALGC, in the club, but they are not allowed as members of this club. Women are allowed as friends of the club. You'll see if you go to the website, it says friends of FOS. These are friends of SALGC. These are women who says, guys, look, we love what you're doing, a hell of a lot. And we could be of value to yourself to support wherever you need. And they are allowed to be involved in program development and execution. For instance, last year we ran a national boy child essay writing competition. So the project team that ran that competition had lots of women inside because they have got various skills like project management, like accounting, like auditing, all that. So we really welcome women to come and be part of the club, because this is a family platform where, although we're targeting a man to wake up so that we can eliminate so many social ills that we see, but we also need voices of our women. So we've got boy child as well, we've got a youth as well, who we call ambassadors of this club to try and spread the word in schools and everywhere, universities where the youth are, so that we try to change how our societies and our communities look like. So in a nutshell, this is what SALGC is about. SALGC it's a family, it's a platform. We always say we are not a Me Too kind of a club that provides a Me Too kind of a solution. We have a contemporary, a conventional methods of addressing the challenges, because we believe that it starts in the mind. Until the mind has been liberated, everything else will be okay. But if the mind is not liberated, whatever you invest in that mind, it's truly gonna leak through the crevices of the leaking mind. So thank you very much for coming to the club, and we hope that you will be a friend of the club, and we will share the message, and we really, truly are blessed to have you here. And with that, in a nutshell, I'll give it over to the chairperson of this lecture today, Mr. Majoka Ntebo, who shocked me and surprised me. Thank you, Tebza. You got me
Thank you very,
flat.
thank you very much, my leadership, and thank you very much to everybody, including Rebecca, that is joining us for this. It's going to be a very informative session. What I'd like everybody to do on Facebook, even on this call now, is to get your piece of paper, your pen, and get your thinking caps ready, because this is all about alternative education. We know what COVID did. A lot of kids started staying at home, and as parents, I for one, I know it was a challenge. It was a challenge to homeschool my daughter, and I want to know how this mother of 4 did it. She's been doing this for years. She homeschooled her 3 kids. She's homeschooling her 14-year-old at this moment. She is leading a group of over 22,000 interested people that want to know more about homeschooling. And I would like everybody, before we let Rebecca come on stage, for us to give her a round of applause for giving her time to come and be with us today on a Sunday where people are enjoying the Heritage Weekend and having a good time. Can you all switch on our videos and voice notes and just give a round of applause to our speaker today for giving us this time today?
Yay!
Rebekka.
Rebekka.
So, Rebekka, the stage is yours. Are you ready to wow us? We want you to tell us everything that we don't know about homeschooling. Is it as difficult as we think? What is the do's, the don'ts, and everything that you can share with us? Let's welcome Rebekka on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Rebekka Lienberg.
Thank you so much, Tebogo, and everybody else for having me here. Can you all hear me clearly and there's no hiccups? Looks good.
Yes, we can hear you, Rebekka.
Thank you for this wonderful introduction and vote of confidence and an opportunity to share with you one of my absolute passions in life. That is raising of my family, the education of my children, and the grassroots movement that I believe is indeed going to change the world for the better. While I loved school myself, I was deeply disappointed in what my children were offered when I sent them to school. I'm not anti-school and I'm not anti the establishment. I just really believe that standards need to be kept, reasonable at least, and that success is measured not by academic accolades, but by the long-term survival of a family in its wholesome entirety. If you can put up that first slide for me, please, Bo. My PowerPoint skills are really not good.
So Rebekka, sorry, the file that you've shared, it's still on Google Drive, so we cannot able to download. Rather, maybe you present just from your own computer. We'll just listen to you.
I'm going to see if I can share it like that. I will share the file. Let me see if I can share screen. Okay, you've disabled the screen sharing. You're going to just need to let me share that first one.
Make co-host. Okay, you can share now.
Thank you. Okay, can you see that first one?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'll just read it so that you know where I'm going. Mainstream education tends to teach us a plethora of disconnected facts. It exposes us to ideology instead of training us how to analyze and interpret these seamless random facts and opinions. It's quite a mouthful, that. These are my own words, and this is my opinion of the difference between mainstream schooling and home education in the way that we apply it. What I mean by mainstream education tending to share us a plethora of disconnected facts. Most of you have children at school, and you will know that they move from class to class and they are given a textbook within which there are chapters, and each chapter has their sort of set idea that they have to learn, and each teacher will present that chapter with the concepts that's in it. And then after that lesson, they'll go to the next one, and then they'll go to the next one, and then they'll go to the next one. So there's a tremendous amount of compartmentalizing of information, and the children don't really have the opportunity to draw a line of connection between each subject. And this is something that we actually specifically steer away from in homeschooling. So from the outset, you must understand that home education is not a replication of school done at home. Home education is an entirely new paradigm shift of looking at how to educate your child in the manner in which you're doing it. So with mainstream education, teaching the children a set of disconnected facts, we try and actually not do that. We try and do the exact opposite. And I will explain later on how we do it. Another thing mainstream education does, it exposes us to an ideology. Instead of training us to analyze, interpret these facts and opinions. We all know that everything in life is made up of opinions and facts, where some of it is proven, some of it is still in the process of being researched, and then of course we all make our opinions on each matter. In a school setting, the curriculum statements, and there are many, teaches an ideology to the child. It is a predetermined set of information given to the mainstream schools, and teachers are trained to teach that specific thing. So it doesn't deviate much, and parents don't have a tremendous amount of say in the concepts that their children are taught and at which age they're taught these concepts, and the ideology with which they are taught in terms of a context for the concept. I don't want to get into each specific context because each family will have their own worldview, and each family will modify those things that they understand according to their culture, their religion, their experiences, their circumstances, and they will offer their children that which they know their children will need to survive, and each family is different. So the ideology with which we educate our children is very diverse, and a mainstream school setting doesn't really allow for that anymore. Within, excuse me, the history of home education, where home education actually came before school education as we know it, each family came from a community, and each community had a very strong community identity. And we would see this very clearly with rural settlements of people, perhaps with farming, or they're just far flung. They would get together and form their community, establish their culture, and they would have what we would call co-ops today. I don't know what they called it back then, but the people would get together for various community functions and events, and they would share their ideology, and they would discuss it and disagree about it, debate it, but the children would be party to this. So you can see this is very different from a school setting where you pick a lunch and your kid goes off to school and they get a prescribed ideology to digest, with which to formulate all the ideas that they're going to use for the rest of their life on how to go about their life. So this is how they learn to analyze and interpret the seemingly random facts and opinions that they're given at school. So we'll start at the very beginning. Homeschooling is perfectly legal in South Africa. Yay! We must really, really appreciate this. I think we have been a little bit spoiled in South Africa in terms of our last quarter of a century, where we have had so much freedom to do, think, feel, communicate, and be exactly like we have been being, that we have forgotten that we actually have one of the most modern and the most inclusive constitutions that any country could have. We have a great system in South Africa, and we can be extremely proud of it. And one of the things that we can be thankful for is that homeschooling in South Africa is completely legal. We do not have limitations in terms of having to motivate for homeschooling. It is a prior right that a parent can choose for their child as an alternative to the mainstream education. And I thank you guys again for giving me this wonderful opportunity to be part of this and being able to share with all of you. I'm going to go to my next slide. I have just got to, sorry, technical difficulties. I'm just trying to figure out how to stop screen sharing here. Oh dear, sorry about this. Okay, I don't know why I can't access my notes here, but anyway, let's just carry on. If you're brand new to homeschooling, you need to just know a few things. You need to know that you have a right to choose how to educate your child. Education being an imposed set of life skills and information on our children is something that parents don't really have control over. As we know, everything is in a set textbook. But we do have a right in this country to actually choose how to educate your child. And homeschooling is obviously one of those things. I really consider this a gift as a parent. And in our country, we have only two options of private education and public education. And homeschooling is an extension, if you will, of private education. If a parent wants to remove their child from the mainstream public and private school options, they register for homeschooling. And then what happens is you as the parent actually takes on all the responsibility and accountability for your child's education. This is quite a hefty topic. I don't want to go into too much detail about that today because it is an ethical consideration which we could always have a discussion about later on in terms of accountability and responsibility. And from your 5 pillars that you've described, I think that really fits in well with your ethos as a group, because a parent is both accountable and responsible. Where you compare that to the government can be responsible for providing education, but they bear no accountability. If you look at all the laws, the accountability always rests with the parent. There is never a time where the government takes accountability. So whatever goes wrong, it is fully on the parent's shoulders, but the responsibility can shift based on whether you are homeschooling your child or whether you have registered your child for an education with the private school and the government. So if you go into one of the schools where your child is in a public school, or one of these schools where they're part private, part government, the responsibility to provide the education actually falls on the government. And your responsibility is just to take them there, drop them off and go home. But the accountability of what happens to that child through the process always remains with the parents. And I think this is where it became a dilemma for me, and I think for many parents, whereby I would send my children to school and I would be accountable for whatever's going to happen to them, even when they're at school, even though the school is now responsible for providing the education. So when they would come home and I would see that I really didn't like what was going on, I could complain, I could participate in some of the schools, what they would allow me to participate in, which wasn't much. And the responsibility is still the school. So they would modify what they were teaching the children within a very limited context, because they are also answerable to the government. So one can't really change anything that the schools do. You can just really make suggestions. But when things go wrong, as a parent, you are still accountable. You would have to do extra lessons if your kid is not managing. You would have to get therapy for your child if something's gone wrong at school. If you haven't got the financial backing to provide enough lunches or transport or school clothes, you know, all those very mundane things, or what we think is mundane anyway, those are on us completely. And what I found is that the peripheral impact of all those things while sending my child to school was in conflict with them receiving an education at school. So if I didn't have the finances to do the kinds of lunch I would want to do for my kids, it would cause me a tremendous amount of stress. If transport became a problem, they would miss school. Then, of course, they become behind. And then the responsibility is now shifted towards me together with accountability. But at no point do the schools hold these accountable moments, really. Did somebody want to say something? I'm getting some interference, yeah, of sound. Anyway, so as a parent,
Go ahead.
Okay, as a parent, you've got a right to educate.
Go ahead.
This is genuinely a gift, and it's not just a matter of where your child is going to get their education. Is it in a classroom or is it at home? Because homeschooling is more than just a venue. Homeschooling is actually a lifestyle choice. And for us right now in 2021, we have reached a point where those people who've been homeschooling for a very long time, who did it as a specific choice with their plans and everything in place, are not the same group of homeschoolers as those who have found they've been forced into this situation. We don't have all the proper terminology, excuse me, but many parents are calling it homeschooling by choice or homeschooling by chance. So if you're homeschooling by choice, this is something you've always wanted to do. If you're homeschooling by chance, it's because that's your circumstance and you don't really have a choice. And for some people, it might be a temporary thing. For others, it's just something they don't want to do, but they've been forced into it and they've just got to make it work. And we have found that for many, many parents who have ended up in the situation of having to homeschool their children, they have learned so much about themselves and about their children and about homeschooling that they have chosen to make this something that they want to implement in their lives on a permanent basis. I'm hoping you can, I'm just trying to share my next slide. Hold on one second. Sorry, I'm having a technical issue here again. Okay, while I'm going to try and fix this, I'm just going to actually continue talking. Can you hear and see me all right still? Are we still okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So I spoke last about if you choose to home educate, you as the parent will hold the responsibility as well as the accountability. And the reason for this is when you register your child with the home education department, you're actually taking back that full say-so over your child's life. You're no longer contracting out anything to the government, to a school, to a teacher, to a separate body. You are essentially becoming the facilitator of your child's educational journey. Home education is the correct term used by the government to define this educational choice for our children. It is an alternative to sending your child to an institution where they receive their lessons from teachers in a place that is registered for the educational purposes. And all these nuances actually are pertinent to what home education is and the reason why it's called an alternative. If we just look basically at the point of fact that schools have to be registered for educational purposes, this means that no school can actually exist on their own randomly. They have to have what they call an MS number from the Department of Education, which means they have been completely vetted to take care of the child. And the reason for this is that children are vulnerable. Obviously, they are a target of many different industries, which we're all quite familiar with. And the government does have a responsibility, and here they are accountable to actually see that the places of education that are registered with them are safe for the children. And because of this, they have to do their checks and balances have to be seen in terms of the area. And obviously they don't have the same rule for every kind of school, but they've got a set of basic rules which they will make sure a school has to comply with. So when you homeschool, you're no longer sending your child to a place that is registered with anybody that checks. You're now bringing your child home. And this has opened up a bit of a dilemma for the Department of Education, because now the children are leaving a system whereby they can keep an eye on the safety of the children. And it is fair to say that, you know, they really do need to actually do their bits in ensuring that children who are not in schools are actually given the opportunity to get an education. It's underwritten in our laws. A child has a right to their education from the age of 7 to 15, and I'll get more into that later on. But when they go into an institution, that institution has determined how many children are in a class, who the teacher may be, what kind of qualifications they have, what they are allowed to teach, the manner in which they are going to teach their lessons. And of course, this changes very often. I'll give myself as an example. When I started my children in school, they had a specific kind of curriculum. I don't remember all the names because this is going back 18 years now. But they changed it quite often. So every year when my children went from grade R to grade 1 to grade 2 and then 3 and then in grade 4 I'd had enough. But every single year they changed the curriculum. So each year the teachers had to go for refresher courses. The children were taught with an entirely new approach, and it actually got very, very confusing for my children, especially because they didn't know what was expected of them. The teachers complained incessantly because it wasn't the way they were trained. So there was a new system implemented. They had to be retrained every time, and they were already taking time to get to know their children, because one of the biggest markers of success for children learning academically has to do with how they interact with the person who's teaching them. The teacher really needs to build a rapport with a child in order to be able to teach them effectively. So if they have to constantly modify the way that they're teaching, or if they're not allowed to teach something in the way that they are used to teaching, you're not only limiting the children, you're limiting the teachers. So it really becomes a terribly unfair situation. And the impact of that was immediately visible on my children within the first year. And I'm surprised that took 3 to 4 years to get to the point where I'd had enough of it. But I think all of us we're very primed to give the system a chance, to trust the system, to not question too much. But, you know, I did eventually, and then I decided homeschooling was the way to go. It's a great alternative, and you become the facilitator. The word facilitator for homeschooling parents is one we use specifically because we don't want to say that we are the teachers. The media represents homeschooling in quite a specific light. And if you read the newspapers and then the commentary that goes on there, you will often see that parents are criticized for trying to be a teacher of everything. And you'd hear things like, you know, how can one parent fulfill the role of 8 different teachers doing 8 different subjects? And I do find this quite an unfair comparison, because it's actually not what we're doing. We're not bringing our children home to emulate school that has been done in the classroom. We're becoming a facilitator, and we are actually empowering our children to take hold of their own education so that they can learn at their own pace and they can take ownership of the information, not just of the process, but actually the information that they're assimilating so that they can use that information. It's quite a difference when you speak to someone who has read a book and has understood other people's perspective on a topic, compared to when you speak to somebody who's really dug into that topic and they've maybe read multiple books on a subject and they've spent a lot of time doing research and thinking about that topic. If you sit with someone who's done that and you discuss whatever the topic may be, I'm not going to even give an example because it's just too many, you will very quickly know that that person has almost a library of information within their minds. And as you're discussing the topic and you've got your questions and they've got their opinions, they will be drawing from the various multifaceted perspective that they have on the topic because it belongs to them. That information is in their head. They have taken ownership of it. They haven't needed to just get a textbook and learn the definitions of things. They can really discuss something in depth. And you can really learn a lot from people like that, because they can approach things from a textbook perspective, and they can say to you, this particular school of thought thinks that, or that textbook teaches this, or this expert sees it that way, and so on. And that is wonderful if we can actually learn to give our minds the capability of being open enough to many perspectives. because obviously that means we can learn more. And that's what I mean when I say that when you send your child to an institution where they're receiving their lesson from a teacher in a place that's registered for educational purposes, you start to see that it becomes a little bit contrived. I'll try my screen sharing again. Sorry about I'm not tech savvy. I tell you, that's one thing I would really love to be able to be good at. And I see children are extremely amazing at it nowadays. I'm so sorry, I don't think I'm able to make this work, so I will just have to go on and talk from my own slides without sharing it with you. I might figure it out as we go along. Okay. All schooling is divided into phases. And it's important that we know that homeschooling is specifically that period, which is the compulsory education phase. And that is from the age of 7 to the age of 15. After the age of 15, I don't know if you guys know this, but a child can leave school. They don't actually have to stay in school. They don't have to do grade 10, grade 11, and grade 12, and this is legal. And a parent actually can't stop a child. If a child really chose to do this, obviously we would, but legally a child can actually stop there. And that is the only part of a person's life that the government insists that you receive an education for which it is accountable. It will not, after the age of 15, force you to school your child or force a child to go into school if they don't want to, because the law doesn't provide for that. But according to law, a child must receive education during these years too, and we've got to obviously as parents ensure that we make it possible for them. I want to speak a little bit about a guy called Noam Chomsky. He is a public intellectual, really. They consider him one of the foremost public intellectuals. He's a professor emeritus of linguistics at MIT. And he said something that is used quite a lot in many contexts of this thinking of freedom and emancipation of your mind, which I think is your theme within which the homeschooling is being set. And this is what Noam said. He says the education system is supposed to train people to be obedient, conformist, not think too much, do what you're told, stay passive. It's quite a mouthful that for a 93-year-old philosopher, cognitive scientist, historian, social critic, and political activist, to say something so normal and obvious is really quite something. And he often reaches very similar conclusions to what parents reach for their own children. And we know this because we've experienced this. Moms and dads really reach out to find answers in their desperation, you know, when they contemplate the world and especially when the children have problems. And I think for most of us, we do know that the norm is not the perfect school career where your child starts and finishes, has been happy the whole way through and does well. That's not normal. It's extremely rare. In fact, I don't know anybody in my entire circle of friends and family and acquaintances who has a child like that. Even the child who I do know who excelled, finished school early and went to university at the age of 16, had trouble. So it's not a perfect environment. And we try and understand or decipher what's coming, you know, into our children's future. And one of the things that we really need to keep focus on is that we get this disjointed little bits of information. And when we find ourselves in a spot of trouble for our home life or our jobs or our schooling, it's important to note that we don't always have all the bits of information. We don't have the full story with which to make all the right choices. And we have to be a little bit more forgiving to ourselves as parents and just keep trying. And homeschooling gives us the freedom to do this. So when you are making your choices and you find you've perhaps chosen something in your homeschooling journey that didn't work, or something that happened in your previous schooling journey that has left perhaps some trauma, because South Africans tend to experience many traumas. The homeschooling environment really gives you an opportunity to fix these things. There's a scope or a window through which you can start healing those aspects of your life which directly implicates your ability to learn. And that is a whole other topic. It's extremely vast, and it is one of the most common reasons why people choose to homeschool, is because of trauma. They bring their children out of the environment of mainstream to bring them home, to protect them, and to create some form of control around the experiences of the child, so they experience less trauma so they can start healing. Noam said something in an interview I watched the other day that is in fact a sort of an underlying foundation of what homeschooling parents have been trying to accomplish within their journeys. It's what we've recognized a long time ago, and I think what more and more people are recognizing now within the situation of COVID, and that is the matter of impunity. Noam said, and I quote, "An era of impunity is over." And he was specifically talking in this context about the withdrawal of the troops from Afghanistan, but I think he did mean it in a far-reaching way, because we've reached that era of impunity being over. Now, to understand what Noam means, we need to know what is this concept of impunity. Impunity means that a wrong is not accountable or responsible for what it has caused or done. It is something that goes unpunished. It means that the harm or loss meted out to its victims is never compensated. I think as South Africans, that is really hard hitting. It sort of hits me in the solar plexus every time I read it. And we have been living for many decades under systems which impose education on our children, but for which there is no impunity. And I believe it is from this standpoint of imposed education that a perpetual discovery, was launched to figure out the how and the why people learn the way they do. Anytime something is imposed upon people, we should bear both, that imposition should bear both responsibility and accountability. It can't impose something but then not be accountable. These are quite different concepts, but they're kind of similar. So this takes me back to what Noam said. The education system is supposed to train people to be obedient, conformist, not to think too much, and to do what you're told, and to stay passive. And if we do that, we never ever get to hear the whole story of what's going on. Today's system teaches us that stepping out of line, and I'm using that phrase as a pun because that's all we do in schools is cue and stay in line, and the kids are taught to physically be very obedient to a physical boundary and structure of where to move, when to move, and to specifically constantly ask permission to do so. And the situation within which we are now with COVID, with the lockdowns and the curfews, it really has made me feel like a child. I often get this sense of I just want to rebel because I don't want to be told that I can't get in my car at 12 o'clock at night and decide to drive to Durban to visit my aunt if I really feel the need to, because I'm not allowed to do that. And we're all adults, and that's a kind of choice that we shouldn't have taken away from us. But everybody is complying simply because we've all been trained that standing in a queue, putting up your hand if you want to ask to go to the toilet, you know, those little things are so impressed upon us that it becomes our norm. The system taught us that stepping out of line is a bad thing, something to be ashamed of. And nowadays it's telling us if we don't adhere to the system, we're being dangerous. I even hear words like terrorist being bandied about if we don't follow the rules. We are being trained in places of educational instruction where too many questions are problematic. And that if you ask the wrong questions, you're quite the monster. You're trained that you have to fit in. I'm not going to talk too much about that. I think you guys know enough about all that kind of thing. It's a vast topic, and I think many homeschooling parents have chosen this alternative just for the purpose of stepping out of the system, and that's what the system does. But there's also the question of the academic quality that we get in the system. So to understand how it works, we need to know that all schooling is divided into phases. And these phases are 3-year periods. So there's a phase 1 of 3 years, phase 2 of 3 years, and phase 3 of 3 years. And this is the period that spans between age 7 and age 15. They are called the foundation phase, which is grades 1 to 3. Grade R is not compulsory. By law, I know they say so in all the media outlets, but by law, the only compulsory school-going grade is grade 1. You have to start in that. So grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3 are called the foundation phase. Then grades 4 to 6 is the intermediate phase, and grades 9 to 7 is the senior phase. And this is all that is compulsory. That's it. If you go and have a look on the Department of Basic Education, they have a link there for homeschooling, and they actually go into depth about what they want you to do. They have got requirements and regulations. They do change it from time to time, and as parents, we just have to keep an eye on that because they haven't changed the laws, but then they start changing the regulations. And of course, a regulation is not law. So when you see there's a regulation, you have to go and check it out. You can look at the Constitution, the Schools Act, the Children's Act, as well as the homeschooling policy. These are all very long documents. I will get all the links for you, and we'll put it together with the, on the YouTube thing once it's all done, for those who want to do a lot of in-depth research in that matter. Before I move on to talking about the FET phase, I just wanted to find some notes here. I wanted to say something else about these other phases. You can bear with me for a moment. My slides, I changed something while I was trying to share it, and then I couldn't do exactly what I wanted to do. I need some elevator music in the background here for a moment. So far, are you okay with all the information? Do you feel that this is giving you a good enough backdrop to what education is and the difference between mainstream and home education?
Definitely.
Okay. I want to focus next on the FET phase, but there's just a few things I wanted to say about the combination of the foundation, intermediate, and senior phases. There is a lot to be said about what you teach your children at their age level. The grade levels are a very contrived imposition that has been placed on us to give our children, and it's not a traditional way of educating, and it's also not a natural way for the human mind to actually learn. So that is part of the problem of mainstream education, in that children are forced into an environment that also forces them to learn at a very specific pace, very specific things at an age for which they're not ready to actually digest the information. And furthermore, and this is actually why I really like this opportunity to speak to you and your group, is that there is a huge discrepancy in how the education system has been designed to cater for boys and for girls. And as much as the world doesn't want to know this, men and women are not the same. We do not have the same biology. We do not have the same hormones. We've got tremendous similarities. We're all able to do the same things. We're just as strong as each other, intelligent as each other, all those great things, but we're still different. And those differences actually complement each other. So, you know, when you get married and you have your family, what you were saying earlier, Bo, you know, spoke to teamwork. And when you have a team, you can't teach everybody on the team the same strategy. They need to know the overriding strategy of where they're going, but each person has their role to play. And it is within that setting of family that homeschooling really comes into its own. Because when a child is born, obviously those first few months or year, it's almost exclusively mother attached, because it's breastfeeding. That's where it's getting its main emotional support from, because it grew within the mom and heard the mom's voice for so many months. So that is the imprint on its mind. So it needs the mom, not because the mom is better, but because that's how a child develops. And those first 3 years of a child's development, which actually speaks a lot to our parenting and this, what you're trying to do in your work, will help people in that as well. That early childhood development is part of the education. It really is crucial that parents actually bond together as a team to provide the kind of environment where the child's brain can grow in such a way that when they start learning to read and write and count, they have this emotional stability that actually speaks to their intellect to be able to learn it. Many of children's learning disabilities actually stem from problems within the family or society. So, and I'm actually a product of that myself. I came from a divorced home, and I experienced it, and I felt it, and it was a reality to me. Even though I didn't have the words to quite put it into action, I realized over the course of my life that this really had an impact on me. So the foundation phase, which is grades 1, 2, and 3, all over the world, normally that starts at about the age of 5 or 6. In South Africa, we start at the age of 7. And I would just like to speak a little bit about something here it's very much my personal opinion, but a child doesn't need to know all the information right from the outset. A child needs to know that they're loved and that they're safe. And when a child has that as a backdrop, everything around it, from the parents' conversation, the grandparents' jobs, what they see when they walk on the streets, everything actually becomes a learning opportunity. And we, in our homeschooling circles, we talk about child-directed learning, natural learning, unschooling is another word you'd hear. And all these refer to the ability of a child to pick up the things that's happening around them and actually make that their education. And when a parent becomes aware of that, and they consciously and attentively start looking out for the learning opportunities in a child's life, they use that as lessons. So the lesson in school on how to calculate change, you know, because you're not doing maths maybe, or how to negotiate with somebody who's difficult, they would actually have a specific lesson on that, and they would give a child a set of circumstances and ideas that they can work through, and then teach them how to think about that. Whereas in a more natural setting, when you go to the shop and you deal with someone that's a problem, or somebody's given you the wrong change, or your child didn't take enough money to deal with what they wanted to buy, or they want something they can't afford. These are life lessons, but you can turn those into actual lessons. You can go home and then use that experience and describe what you went through and put it on paper and start turning that into a lesson on fractions, for instance. If your child is around about grade 4 or 5, you would actually say to them, this is the money we have, and this life lesson that we've now experienced speaks directly to the maths that's in your textbook. So it starts making what they're experiencing very much alive. It's a practical thing that they can assimilate in their mind and form as a memory, not just as something on the paper that's got numbers and figures that they need to remember. It is a very wholesome, integrative way of teaching. And you actually get teachers who can do this. There have been some teachers in my life who have been able to do this, and I've seen some of my children's teachers are very talented this way, but it's very much a calling. Not everybody is geared to teach a child like that. Most teachers are taught in their teacher training college, this is the way you teach, this is the approach you take, this is the concept, and you do it within that order, and the child has to be that age to do it. And it doesn't suit all the children. So when you're homeschooling, especially in foundation age, I personally wouldn't advise anybody to put their little kids in school, because whether we've got COVID or not, because that is the formative years where the child's heart and mind are growing together. And that is the time where they learn to love learning. Unfortunately, my kids were in school over that time. And when I removed them from school, it took me quite a few years to undo the damage that happened to my children. There was lots of therapy, lots of efforts, many sleepless nights, and a tremendous amount of research on my part to try and figure out now what exactly happened, why did it happen, and how to fix it. And even when you find the way to fix it and you're on your course of action and things are getting better, you find over the years the children remember things that have happened during those first 5 years of their schooling. And that seems to make more of an impact on them than what's happening now, because they're using those memories with which to interpret their current context. And that's why it becomes so critical that things need to be age appropriate for each child. Obviously, this is a global issue at the moment. The comprehensive sex education that they've got in schools is a very huge issue. Because they're teaching children things at an age where children shouldn't know about these things. They shouldn't even be exposed to it. But there are children who are. We have a kind of a culture of abuse in our country that stems from various issues. And because of that, it is incumbent on the government to provide that kind of education, because children that are in that situation need to know. So it's really a rock and a hard place, because if your child has suffered some kind of abuse, it is good for them to have a teacher that's going to teach them, this is what happened. It's not your fault. You're too young. You don't bear responsibility or accountability for what's happened to you, and that it can be fixed. You can heal. You know, this is the kind of message we want all our children to have. But you give a message like that to a child who's not had any experience like that. They've come out of maybe a home where they've been very privileged to have a complete home with extended family and no such traumas. When they are confronted with something like that, it disrupts the process and the journey that they're on, and they're being given something to focus on and to learn about that they're not ready for. And for that child, it's very unfair. And for many homeschoolers, they make this choice because they don't like the content that's being given in the school, specifically along this line. And also because it's given from a perspective of a non-religious context, because of course we're not allowed to have a religious context in schools anymore. So you know, obviously with each religion it would be different, but for a child who comes out of a home who wouldn't need to know that kind of thing, it is unfair to impose it. So education on the whole in the mainstream is very imposed, whereas homeschooling, the education can be tailor-made to what suits your child. And if that means your child has suffered some sort of abuse where you have to approach it, you know, you can actually do that with the help of a professional and with a tremendous amount of time. You're not limited to a moment during the day where you're going to spend this time on, you know, this is bad touching, this is good touching, and then, okay, now it's science, and now it's maths, and now we're talking about the mountain ranges, and now we're discussing this book that somebody wrote. This compartmentalization of everything is a mess, and the children can't cohesively put all the ideas together to formulate a vision for their own lives. One of the things that I spoke at a talk recently was learning styles. And this is very important for the foundation and intermediate phases, which is grade 1 to grade 6. Because children are still learning to be what they need to be, they have got tendencies that will be dominant. For instance, when your child goes to grade 1, by then you should know if they are left-handed or right-handed. That is to do with the brain dominance and the dexterity. Apart from being able to be having a focus on one or another, this also happens in other aspects of our lives. I'll talk a bit later more in depth about that. It's to do with learning styles. It is a bit of a controversial subject because the professionals are not in agreement on all of this. But as parents, what we can do is we can read about all these topics, and we can take little bits from everything, and we can see, you know what, does that fit my child? No, it's got nothing to do with this case. Or wow, this exactly explains my little boy who cannot sit still, who actually would need to play with a pool noodle while I'm reading to him because he can't sit and listen. You need to actually inform yourself by doing a tremendous amount of research to know where your child is at and what you can offer them in those formative years. And learning styles are something really good to research. I'm not going to go in depth into that. It is a huge topic. It would keep us here for at least another hour today. But look into learning styles. There's 5 major or main ones that they talk about. They call it visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and a read-write style. I call it book learning. And I don't believe any child is only one. I believe as human beings, we're all of it because it makes up all of our senses. But it is possible that a child may experience a dominance towards one of those styles where they like getting information and working with information in a visual way. So they would like infographics, they would like slides, my slides that I can't make work. They would like to see pictures and colors and things like that. And then you try and cater for that. Now, in a classroom situation, it can't be catered for because normally you've got 20 to 30 children, you've only got so much wall space, and depending on the current school of thought where that is concerned, you may find one teacher clutters the classroom with pictures from one end of the other that some children who have sensory difficulties find way too overwhelming. They can't even focus. And then you get the other end of the spectrum where a teacher believes in only white walls and there's nothing to look at, and it feels a little bit clinical. And many children might feel that that is overwhelming to them. So it's not possible for a teacher to, in a class situation, cater to all the children's learning styles. It would be quite a lot of chaos if you have way too many colors or no colors, or way too much sound or absolute silence. And having homeschooled my 4 children, I actually have seen how they all are quite different. And that was one of the reasons why I allowed my children to do some of their schooling in different environments within the house. They would actually choose what would work for them. Some of my kids like to have music in the background because they find the auditory distraction allows their book learning to focus more, because they are not so tuned into the sound because it's a consistent sound, like white noise really. So when they read, they can remember what they're reading. Now, a teacher won't be able to spend the time with each of her 30 kids to know this. Okay, like I've said, there are some teachers that do, hey, there are some amazing human beings that make the most beautiful teachers that do so much for our kids. So I don't want to sound like I'm trashing teachers. I'm not a fan of institutionalized education, and I don't think that the way teachers are trained to teach children is completely correct. It's not wholesome because it's too diverse. But at the same time, I want to recognize and honor those teachers who give their lives to educating our children. As a parent, I am very grateful for that, and I have had many people like that have helped us in our lives. Anyway, so visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and the book learning are the main learning styles. Read up on those and try and just keep an eye on it, because your child might show a tendency to prefer one. And if they do, cater to that. Let them have that. Let them use that to take that information and make it their own, like I explained earlier. In the foundation phase, which is grade 1 to 3, children need a tremendous amount of flexibility and patience. And if they want repetition, give it to them. Some children will tell you immediately, don't tell me the same thing twice. So with that child, you do need to repeat the information because that's how they learn, but you have to find a creative way to offer the same information in a different way. That is the hard part for a parent. But if you know your child, you're able to do that. With the intermediate phase, when they're moving to grade 4, this is the biggest jump from foundation phase to intermediate phase, is the biggest jump the school children have throughout their whole career. It's even worse than going from high school to university. I believe they actually need to add another year into the schooling system, and they must have like a grade 3.5 or something like that. But there is a space between grade 3 and grade 4 where there's a huge cognitive jump for the children to make into the intermediate phase, where they have to perform on an academic level that they're not quite ready for. And at the same time that this is happening, that is round about the age of 12, 11 and 12, 13, depending on what age they started school. That is when the brain actually goes through a major shift. It changes its physical shape. And of course, the hormones are starting to come into play. So it is such a hugely momentous time in a child's life where they're going through so much change physically and emotionally, to burden them with an academic demand and schedules and time frames and things that might not be age appropriate for them. You know, I mean, just as I'm speaking, you can imagine this is huge for a little person who's still trying to figure out who they are to try and keep up with. And then, of course, our parenting styles play a huge part in that, because we have been socialized to understand that children have to perform to a certain level, where we are given yardsticks. We're told that at 6 months, the child must sit. And if they're talking, you know, at the age of 3, it's a big problem. Or if they're talking too early, they're a genius. These things are all actually quite immaterial, because each human being is different and they develop at their own pace. But what we do know is that at certain junctures in a child's development, there are very specific brain phases that they go through. One of our homeschooling moms actually wrote a book about this. So I will add links to all of that. That would be a really good read. If for those parents who want to focus more on the neurological development of their children and how they can, even if you keep your kids in school, this is good to do. You don't have to be a homeschooler to implement any of this stuff. You can keep your children in school, mainstream, and still use all this information to ameliorate their experience of education, and it will empower them to still take control of what they're learning. And if you find your child is behind, which we actually all have, the kids always have gaps, because between foundation, intermediate, and senior phase, we have had something called the progression policy in South Africa, where you're only allowed to fail or be kept back 1 year per phase. And then there's also a limit for that. So what happens is, if a child has a less than satisfactory experience throughout the whole 3-year period, let's say the whole intermediate phase was a problem, perhaps a parent died, or you lost your home, this kind of emotional impact on a child can actually take years for them to snap out of a shock that they might be living through, and they miss a lot at school. Maybe they just were bullied. You know, it could be something small. It doesn't have to be that big. But experiencing anything, and I mean, obviously they're going to experience something in grade 4 because now they're becoming teenagers. So everybody becomes hypersensitive, and we're living in a world where everything is online. So children live with a lot of fear of being exposed. So in that intermediate phase, that's grade 4 to grade 6, we actually see most of the trauma occurring there. There will be gaps, no matter how astute you are as a parent, no matter how many wonderful teachers they have, and no matter how much money you've been throwing at it for extra lessons. It is okay for you to keep your child back a year, take them out and homeschool a year to catch up with the gaps, or to just learn to live again and to think again, and get your children back onto an emotional and cognitive footing where they can deal with the information they have to learn, so that when they get to their last years of education, maturity is the thing that actually pulls them through. A mature child, not somebody who just thinks maturely, but who feels maturely. This has to do with EQ more than IQ. They will be better equipped to actually learn, especially the difficult subjects. This is why maths is such a problem in our society, because we live with a lot of trauma. We struggle to have the different aspects of our personalities develop in synchronicity with each other. And you often find children who are very clever, but they can't do maths because they've had some sort of trauma in their life that they haven't been able to deal with yet. And dealing with the emotional trauma actually enables a child to do maths. As crazy as that sounds, it's the truth. And a lot of kids miss out on many opportunities simply because they were offered academics they were not ready for at the age they were at. So yeah, the foundation, intermediate and senior phases, which is the compulsory education phase, is the most crucial 9 years of your little human being's life. It is the time where they're going to learn how to learn, and it is the time where they are going to formulate their personality. Sometimes they choose, sometimes it's just a default of coping mechanisms. But if you compare the kind of impact you can have as a parent, whether you're homeschooling or whether you're sending your child to school every day to be influenced by other people, obviously you can see there's a lot more you can do if you homeschool. So those are the main factors of the homeschooling environment in terms of what it means for a child. I'm going to try my screen sharing again. I want to move on to the FET phase. The FET phase stands for Further Education and Training. I am going to... Okay, I'm hoping this is working. Can you see my screen that I'm sharing?
Yes, we can.
Okay. This is the one I want to be on. This is the education phase. I just want to minimize that because I can't see what I've done there. Okay, the FET phase stands for Further Education and Training. This is grades 10, 11, and 12. Now, by this stage, your child is actually a person. This is where most of the parents found themselves during COVID hitting a brick wall because their kids are getting ready to finish and all the schools closed. And when the schools closed, everybody went online. And because nobody lives online in terms of studying, it was a new thing. Everybody's only used to being online to share food ideas, or if they're an activist, their opinions on things. The children did not cope well with this, and the parents did not cope well with this because nobody was prepared, and nobody became responsible for this because it's not that part of the education experience that is compulsory. There is no accountability here at all. This takes me back to what, I'm going to read it again. An era of impunity is over. That's what Noam Chomsky said. And I think it is here where South Africa can actually make quite a big difference, because we can start demanding that impunity is not something we're willing to accept any longer. If the government imposes something, they should not be immune to some sort of consequence for what they have deemed a compulsory or an imposed set of systems and structures for our children, especially because the parent actually has parental rights. Once your children are starting the FET phase, you are 100% responsible for everything. But what makes this difficult is the government has tightened the laws on this phase. So you can no longer teach your kid exactly what you feel they should know. At this stage, you need to actually register with a service provider, which is accredited by an examinations body. So you actually have to find an online school or some sort of service provider whereby you have to pay them to teach your child, because there's no other way for them to get an exam, to get a matric. So for me, this is, I know this is going to sound strong, but I feel this is where they take our children hostage. Their lives are held hostage during these 3 years, and it is extremely scary for a young person, because they feel the impact of it, but they don't really have the vocabulary with which to describe what they're feeling. And they're also at that point in their lives where they want to spread their wings, they want to experience new things, they want to explore, and they want to go on an adventure. And they are literally shackled at this point. And there really isn't much we can do. Unfortunately, our children need to have a matric. So for homeschooling purposes, although this is no longer technically homeschooling, this is the space or the phase where it becomes very difficult for the parent to do the facilitating and to offer exactly what the children will need or want, because our kids are all different. Yeah, this is quite a hectic topic. I'm probably not going to go too in depth in that, because I have some very strong opinions about this. I love the fact that children can become very expert in their topic, because every kid by this stage actually has a love in their life, and school often doesn't cater for it. So one has to force your child to do a bunch of subjects that they don't like in order to get a matric, and many kids find it a total waste of time, and I agree with them. So what you do have as options, can everybody see? It's CAPS, IEB, British curricula, and American curricula. That slide up. I'm not sure it's showing. Okay, those are the options for when you do your grade 10, 11, and 12. In South Africa, we have the National Curriculum Statement, which is CAPS, or you can choose CAPS IEB, which is mostly the private schools. And that is what you need to do to write the National Senior Certificate. In terms of homeschooling, this gets tough for the parent because the content becomes very specific, it becomes technical, and the kids need a lot of help. This is where the textbook learning actually takes precedence. And if you have, during the first few phases, spent enough time letting your children, oopsie, sorry, I'm not there yet, letting your children learn how to learn, even if they are not book learners, if they may be visual or auditory. Sorry, I'm not sure if this is working. Bo, can you just tell me if this is on? No, that's wrong. Okay, can you see the slide is in its whole? Okay, no, this is not good.
Yes, we can.
It has now gone to the wrong slide. I'm sorry. Okay. Can you see the whole slide, or do you see it with my notes?
Only the slides, the whole
Only
slide.
the slide. Yeah, I got it right. I'm on slide 8. I'm nearly done, and I only get it right now. Okay, so these are essentially your child's options for matric in South Africa. It's the CAPS or CAPS IEB, which is what they need to write a national senior certificate. This is what is done in schools. The other two options is a British curriculum and an American curriculum. Now, I say British curriculum because there are two exam bodies that do the examinations for the British curriculum. I don't know if you've heard of Cambridge and Edexcel. Those are the two examination bodies. Cambridge is most popular. It is run by the University of Cambridge in the UK, and everything is done externally. This is what I chose to do with my kids, and that's what they finished with. But Edexcel is another option. It is becoming more and more popular in South Africa because they are run by the Pearson Group, which is becoming quite big in South Africa. They're like an education giant, really. The British curriculum is not easy for the South African kids to do, but it's not totally impossible. If you choose something like this, then the parent has to be very involved, and excuse me, they must spend enough time with their child learning the culture of that examination structure, because the way they ask the questions and what they expect of the students is very different from CAPS and IEB. If you work through something like a British curriculum, you have a lot more freedom, and this is why I chose this compared to the CAPS and IEB. If you're going CAPS and IEB, you have to register your child in grade 10 with a very specific service provider that you would choose, and there are a variety, like Impact and Brainline, and there's the Curo schools have got one now. With COVID, there are so many all of a sudden, but when we started, there was literally 2. But you have to do grade 10, grade 11, and grade 12 in succession and do the whole lot with your curriculum provider. And you have to do exactly as you're told. Your child has to learn at the pace that suits them. They have to learn the context of it and from the books that they're told. This can get very frustrating for children, but it is a safe way to do the high school years if you are now homeschooling. And I'm using homeschooling loosely here because this is essentially called distance education. Once your child has finished grade 9, they're actually doing distance education. And they should, by this stage, be able to work through a textbook on their own. They should be able to take notes on their own, summarize those notes, download past papers and do those past papers and receive feedback from the marking and implement that. That is actually a lot for kids to do, and I do find that children out of a mainstream setting can't do that, whereas children that have been homeschooled right from the beginning, they're able to do that. Well, my daughter was able to do that when she was 14 already, and she actually took control of her own education and she self-studied. I didn't teach her any of that because I don't understand the science subjects. I'm the world's worst when it comes to maths. I quit maths when I was at school and I did my time. So when my kids want to know about maths, I got tutors and we watched YouTube videos. I used a really good curriculum. And they were very prepared when they got to the grade 10 phase to work on their own. And I'm extremely proud of them. For me, it's somewhat of a miracle that a mother who's no good at maths can actually have children that all do very well with maths. That alone should actually prove to people that homeschooling, it doesn't matter what you know as a parent. It actually depends on how you prepare your child and what they do with those tools to educate themselves. Yeah, so that's a British curriculum. With that kind of curriculum, you've got freedom in that. What I really liked about this is if you write your exams for the grade 10 and grade 11 level, and you find you didn't like your marks, your kids can do it again. They can do rewrites. They can do that for years if they like, and they can accumulate the results that they need to have the kind of matric they want, because inevitably you're using your matric to get into a university. The American curricula is similar, but there's more than one. I'll just tell you about a few. The GED is the most common one that we know of. That is not really a curriculum. So the word there is not ideal. It's actually a school leaving set of exams of 4 major subjects, and the children just basically learn to write those exams, and it becomes a general education diploma. That's what GED stands for, which is a matric substitute. It was actually initially developed in America to cater for the troops that had gone over to Vietnam, and they were such young boys that went to do this. When they came home, they obviously hadn't finished school because they went off to war so early, but they couldn't obviously reintegrate into schools because they'd become men. They'd seen death, they'd lost their friends, they were not children. So you can't put a man in a school that has to now learn how to spell and deal with school politics. So they did the GED, which was the 4 major subjects that they would study for. They would write, they could do it in 6 months back then, I think, if I'm not mistaken. That's changed since. Now they have an age limit and a specific time period. But that is where it came from. So it's not strictly a curriculum, but it does work for a matric substitute in this country. The only drawback with that is you can't use that on its own to enter university. You have to do an NQF5 on top of that to get into university. Other than that, we've got the International Baccalaureate, which is, it's actually also British. And then we've got the American High School Diploma, which is really a nice one because that uses a system completely different from everything else, whereby the child can actually grow their credits for all their subjects, and they can accumulate that, and it's based on time spent with a subject. So they have it's much like an apprenticeship with your subject, where you spend so many hours doing that particular thing, and then you get a credit score for it, and that goes towards your mark for your exam. It's becoming very, very popular in South Africa, and we have a lady in the Cape who has done a tremendous amount of work with the American High School Diploma people to bring into our country what's the word? It was here already, but she brought in a lot more of the technical part to it, where the government is starting to actually recognize it, and the universities are taking cognizance of it. And it recently has become, it's been upped in terms of its standard of education. It used to have a bit of a stigma because you do credits, but it's actually a very good way to do a matric. It makes your curriculum more wholesome because it will include things like music and sport and chess, because that gives the children a tremendous amount of scope. So if you choose an international option, you take your child's results at the end of grade 12 to USAF. They've got a lovely office here in Hatfield, if anybody's in my area, with incredibly helpful people. And they basically translate that information into a matric equivalency certificate, and that's what you use to go and apply for your university course that you're wanting to. There is really a lot more technical information on this particular slide. I could do a whole talk just on this, and I'm actually not the expert to discuss each and every one of these. We've got so many amazing parents in our homeschooling community who have each taken one of these topics, and they have focused on it, that they've actually made it a speciality, and they are starting now to actually release videos that give wonderful either a summary or a very, very in-depth lecture on that specific thing. So keep in contact with me. I'll give all my details out, and then if you want specific information on maybe the American curriculum or the British, or who's the expert with IEB and CAPS or whatever, then I might not have all the answers, but I can certainly direct you to the person that will be the one to help you in that line. Okay, so what do you need to know to be able to home educate your children? You might feel like you need to get a degree before embarking on something like this, because I've now spoken about quite a few things. But I'm really here to tell you that this is not so. I've been chatting with parents in my homeschooling community for around 14 years now, which means I've probably spoken to thousands of parents. And it really takes all kinds to make the world go round, as they say. And this is no exception. What you need to know is that you really can do this. Every parent is equipped to do this. You are not underqualified. You are not good enough. This is really quite a mind shift for most people to have to make, because we have been so socialized into thinking that in order to teach somebody, you need to have a qualification, or you need to be an expert in your subject, or you need to have all the information. And this is what is so beautiful about homeschooling. You don't need to know the information. You can take me, for example. I couldn't teach my children maths past the grade 5 or 6 level, because that's literally where I'm at. I would have to get a tutor, but even when we couldn't afford a tutor, I made sure that we had a good system that the children could learn from. I could also speak here about the difference of spiral learning and mastery. Maybe I should touch on it just for a moment so that parents can understand the difference between that. In the mainstream environment, you have what you call spiral learning, which means that every year a child learns in a subject a specific set of things, and the next year they repeat it. So they learn the same thing, but they just add a little bit more. And the next year they repeat it, and then they just add a little bit more. And the next year they repeat it. By then the kids are exhausted. They are so fatigued of having to repeat the same thing, they start losing interest. My kids especially are very sensitive to this. I had to really become creative to give them the same information in a different way, because if I repeat myself, they got irritated with me and they would tell me. That is what you call spiral learning. And it does have its merits. It does work on some level, but it can become too much. Now, mastery learning is where you take a whole topic and you move from the beginning to the end of the topic, and the child learns from that they can understand.
Sorry, Rebecca, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think we have moved into Q&A now. I don't know how many slides you still have to
Okay,
go.
then I will rush through the next thing. Basically, I wanted to tell the parents that they have got this. All you need to do is to know your child, yourself, to understand your limits, and to do a lot of research in terms of the law and what they need to know. I'm actually almost at the end, and what you need to have as a parent. This, I really want to touch on this. We have a problem in South Africa where everybody wants to be like the Joneses. We've got to stop thinking like that. Don't be fooled by what others portray of themselves on Facebook and Instagram. It's not really who they are. So don't compare yourself to that. What you really need to have if you are wanting to homeschool is have confidence in yourself. And I always tell people, fake it until you make it, because you have to actually show your kids that you've got this. So you as a parent are quite vulnerable. Don't let the kids see that you're scared. So have courage. And boundaries is a very important aspect, because as a parent, you need to create boundaries around your home to protect your homeschool environment. And you don't need maximum amount of education. You really can just have a plain and simple matric. I know parents without a matric who've homeschooled their children all the way through to university, and their kids have done exceptionally well. Homeschool is definitely an international tradition, and each country has its own laws regarding this, and it's important for parents to know the laws and regulations that apply to them. At the moment, there's a lot of friction between citizens and governments regarding the rights of parents to choose to educate their children as they see fit. We've seen a lot of this on the news. Recently, France actually made homeschooling illegal, so there's a huge problem. I just want people to know that I think this is our time to shine in South Africa, not just here, but as an example to the world, because we have got such an incredible history of homeschooling that didn't just start when we became free. There is already a prior history to home education in a traditional sense where it almost was a form of activism against apartheid and against the regimes, where parents took control of the education and empowered their children to step out of this. I wish I had more time to go into all of this, but that is essentially the end of my presentation. Do you want me to recap or should we leave it there?
I think looking at the time, Rebekka, I think it's fine if you leave it
I'm
here,
not
and then
hearing
any
you.
recap will be done via the criminal. Can you hear me now, Rebekka? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Tips.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. I was saying that you don't have to do the recap. What we can do now is just wait for the Q&A, because looking at the time now, normally we end at 6 and already it's 20 minutes to 6. So let's rather wait for the Q&A and we get there, because there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of comments. There's a lot of stuff that is said on the chat group that we also need you to clarify, including the difference between online, but I think Mr. Kalakala has explained that one between online and homeschooling. There's also issue of emotional intelligence. There's also an issue of the trauma aspect that we talked about. So there's a few questions. So I don't know if I should go for the first one that says, let's go for the last one. Where can we get a hold of you, please? Let's start with that one. It seems very nice and easy. Where can we get a hold of you? Get a hold of you now.
Okay. I just had to unmute myself. I have been running a homeschooling group on Facebook for about 14 years. So what I will do is, once we've got this up on YouTube, should I add the links to everything there, or do you want them now? I can type it in the text box.
I think the best option is to send the links on the group and also share them with Mr. Tlabakwe, and then we'll share it with the friends of
Let's do that. My cell phone number.
Has any question, yeah. So
I make my cell phone number available as well.
Okay.
I'm not adverse.
Are you sure?
Yes, I've been doing it for years. It's fine. It really is fine.
Okay.
It's fine. I don't mind. If I don't have time, then I tell people, and I've actually not had much problems with that. I like speaking to people, so it actually helps sometimes if I can have an actual conversation with the person, because each person has a very specific context to their experience. It's not a general thing, and they often don't like to discuss it on email or in a group. So I really don't mind. I'll somewhat add it here.
Okay.
Okay, that is my phone number, 083-205-0004. Yeah, and I've got good spyware and spamming things and stuff on my phone, so I've just not had a problem with that, so it's fine.
Okay. It's fine, because I think CC said, okay, CC, you can see the number, it's 083-205-0004. For everyone that wants to, you can get the numbers from the chat group. So I think what you also need to, there's something that you highlighted, Rebekka, that is a question on the chat box regarding the trauma element that save the kids that are going through trauma. But how are we saving that? Is it safe for kids to stay at home if the trauma happened at home? So how is that being solved through homeschooling? Because I think that's the question on the group, yes.
That's an absolutely fair question. I did want to focus specifically on the trauma caused from society and in schools. Homeschooling is a refuge from that. When there has been a trauma at home, depending on the context of that, now you see again, it's really context dependent. There are some cases where I would actually say it's better for that child to go into school because they need to be out of the home. So it really is case by case. And obviously, and when a situation is so bad that a child can't be in their own home, one would hope that family and extended friends and family actually help in that situation. And it might be better to choose the illegal option of cottage schooling, because then the children can have the experience of a school away from home, but have less of a mainstream imposed education. Cottage schooling is something I didn't speak about because it's not technically homeschooling, but many people are choosing to move over to cottage schooling because it's sort of a nice middle ground between home education and mainstream education. It's normally run by an ex-school teacher who would convert her home into like a satellite school of sorts. And then they would either have a curriculum at that school that the parent would buy into, but some are actually starting to do what they call the eclectic approach, which allows for the child to have their own curriculum, and then the teacher actually helps each child with their own curriculum, and there's a diversity in that. So there are huge amount of options for that. I wouldn't say online schooling is a good idea for a child that's experienced trauma at home, because they normally would need face-to-face interaction with somebody, because that is part of the healing process. So I'd probably say a good solution to that would be cottage schooling or tutor centers, where the kids spend the bulk of their day in an environment with other children or other adults who can help them heal through that.
Thank you very much. Balance the kids' social lives as they are. Hello?
Tebza, maybe you should switch off your video because you are breaking terribly. We can't hear you.
Okay, because there's load shedding this side. Sorry. Rebecca, the question is, how do you balance the kids' social life as they are home most of the time?
I think that is a assumption. They're not necessarily home all the time. Homeschooling doesn't mean you only sit at home and learn. Homeschooling just means that you are using your home as the springboard from where your children are being educated, and as opposed to you're using the school. And if you consider that some schools have absolutely no sport, but find other ways to cater for that, that's exactly what the parent has to do. You have to cater for your children's social lives. One can really speak at length about this, because the social aspect in a mainstream environment is quite contrived, whereby children only have their set peer group that they move with from year to year, and that's the beginning and the end of it for them, and if it's good or bad, that's what it remains. Compared to if you're homeschooling, if you find yourself in a situation where you are in a group of people, if you've maybe formed a co-op where your child is particularly unhappy, you can quit it and go find a new group, or you can change the way you do things. So again, homeschooling allows for more flexibility in terms of creating a space that is conducive for your child's learning, and you can tailor make it to fit them. Did that answer the question, or should I talk more about sport and that sort of thing?
I think it has. So I just want to check from the audience that we have, if there's anyone that has a question that is directed at you that's not on the chat group, to please raise their hand and ask the question directly to Rebekka. Any question, leaders? Any question? Rebekka, you've aced it. There's a question that says, how do you close the gap with introverted kids as they don't have a social life? But I think it's almost a follow-up to the social life question that they just asked now.
Not really. I actually think there is an aspect there that I haven't covered. I can actually give you an example that recently, with this COVID situation, a grandmother contacted me because her granddaughter no longer had her parents. She was estranged from the one, and the other parent had died. And of course, the child went to the grandmother, and this child is already very introverted. So she was in a school system and she wasn't coping because she was so introverted, but she's incredibly bright. She does very well with all her exams. She just has meltdowns all the time because she can't cope with all the people. So when the grandmother brought her home and they did a combination of online learning as well as tutoring, this child flourished to the extent that it actually helped her problems with being introverted. She became more able to socialize, not because she socialized more, but because she actually had more emotional space to find herself, so that when she socialized, she felt more in control. So I do think, again, each situation is very specifically pertinent to that child's condition, what they've gone through and what they specifically need. And in that particular case, her problem with being overly introverted was aided by homeschooling.
Thank you very much for that explanation. There's a hand from Portia TDG. Portia, can you kindly ask your question to Rebekka?
Thank you. Quick one. I just wanted to know, how do you separate yourself from being mom and to being teacher and switching back to being mom? How do you balance that?
That is a good question, and I get that often. It is a difficult thing. I think the main challenge with that has to do with a mother's personality. This speaks directly to also how we have been socialized as parents, and we tend to think that when we teach our children something, we need to take on a persona or put on the teacher's hat, and now we're doing a different role. One doesn't necessarily need to do that. I never did that with my kids. When I first started homeschooling, my children were actually still in school. So I started educating them as a mother, knowing that they've got teachers at school. So I never felt the need that I have to act like a teacher. And this naturally translated into, I'm just mom giving you the information, helping you figure out the work or teaching you a concept as your mom. And the one drawback that does have, that I've found, is children tend to take more chances with the parent than they would with the child. They tend, the teacher, they tend to think that the teacher has all the answers. Whereas with the parent, if you say something that the child doesn't agree with, they will challenge you. Now, this can be a bad thing in the sense that if they need to meet a deadline or they need to actually accomplish a task, they simply say no to the parent. And one of the ways I got around that is because we did have some curriculum that we followed. I would say to the kids, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't have control in the situation because this is what the book says you have to do. Oh, it's tough for you. I get what you're feeling, but let's just get through it because that's what the book requires." So I would transfer that authority that the children were now challenging in me as not being the teacher to a book, which is an inanimate object and they can't fight with the book. So normally in that situation, they would just puff and puff, resign themselves to it and then get the work done because the book says so. So that's how I managed that particular hiccup. Obviously, that won't work with all children, but again, each child is different. And if you as a parent really get to know your children, you'll look for creative ways to implement a structure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. Is there any, are you happy, Portia, with the explanation given to you regarding the difference between the teacher and the parent? So do we have any other questions? Because looking at the time now, we are slowly approaching our goodbye times. So I'd like to take maybe a comment from the chairman to hear if there's any comment that he wants to add on this discussion that we're having today regarding homeschooling.
Yeah, I'm struggling with my laptop here. Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, leadership.
Yeah, no, I'm battling with a network today. It's just very bad this. I am, I've been listening, and as Rebecca is going on and on, I'm just thinking, wow, that's just a lot of work, eh? But very necessary work. And what I liked is when you mentioned that we have handed over our education to the third party to teach our children, which is the government and whoever that is. But if we do homeschooling, we are taking that. We're taking the responsibility to educating our children. Because even when you look and you read the Bible, Jesus says you must train your children. You must train them yourself. Don't hand them over to anybody else to train them. So we're having social ills today. We're having all these things that are happening because we are quick to allow the government to dictate what must be taught to our children, forgetting that the government is by far, born or created long after the family was created. The family is the foundation of leadership. So it is our responsibility to know that we have to be educating our children. And I really, really are grateful to Rebecca to have agreed to come to this lecture. Me and her have agreed that she will come back again, and whatever is not covered, we can still redesign it and come back again. And the questions that still has to be answered, we can maybe send them to her via email, and then the next round also will answer many questions that would not have been answered today. So once again, thank you very much, Ms. Rebecca. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't know how many times I can thank you for this. So yeah, I love that. My biggest phrase for me was taking over our power, education from anybody else's into our hands to educate our children. We have biggest challenges of parents who don't even attend parents meetings in schools and whatever. Parents are just not involved in their children's education. And this is just the beginning of educating parents that actually this is your responsibility, not the government at all. So I'm truly excited, and thank you very much for this opportunity, Chairman, to allow me to make a comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, leadership. For those that want to send an email to Rebecca, the email is Rebecca. It's double K. It's not a C. It's double K A at homeschoolingsassociationsa.co.za. Just note that it's not a C, Rebecca. It's a double K, Rebecca.
And
It's
it's
R. It's R A R E B E double K A.
Homeschooling. It's just
It's Homeschool Association.
Association. Yes.
Homeschool Association, SA one word, Homeschool Association, SA one word, .co.za. It's REBEKKA. That's the email address for Rebecca, and Homeschool Association SA. That's the full address, .co.za. So unfortunately, we won't be taking any other questions. So if you have questions, you can kindly email them to Rebecca. And then when we're doing a follow-up session, Rebecca will come back and answer those questions based on the email that she had received. There's also the phone number that Rebecca has dropped on the chat box. If you want Rebecca's number, you can also look at the message on the chat box. It is 083-205-0004. 083-205-0004. That's Rebecca's numbers and email. So if there's any information that you want to find out more about homeschooling, because it is alternative education, it is where everybody is heading up, make sure that before you even attempt to take your kid for homeschooling, you have all the right information. You're taking charge of your kid's education, make sure that you've got all the right information. I want to say to Rebecca, 1 minute in closing, and then we're saying goodbye to our audience on Facebook and on this platform. Back to you, Rebecca, for just 1 minute saying goodbye to us.
Thank you very much. As you can tell, there is really a lot more I can say about this topic, but I just want to encourage parents that homeschooling is not as difficult as people say it is, but it's also not as easy as people say it is. Everything in life takes effort and work, and I'm very pleased that this particular group of people, with their focus on where they're taking the men in our country, has reached out to our community to learn more about this. I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and I hope everybody takes the time to do more research And we will add all the links. That we're not just on Facebook, we really are everywhere. I will give all the information through, and anybody can look up.
Thank you very much, Rebekka. Thank you very much for that. When I say thank you very much to everybody.